Welcome to another Signal Conversation. I'm excited about this one because it's my dear and long-term friend, Deborah Conrad, who is joining us, the founding partner of Mixtape Partners. Deborah's been a 35-year plus career marketer for both very large companies and startups. She was at Intel for almost 3 decades, the last 6 of which she served as the CMO and part of the team that launched the famous and defining Intel Inside campaign. She pioneered experiential and content marketing and moved Intel into all kinds of categories that it was formerly not comfortable with. But for the past several years, Conrad has focused on working with startups with an emphasis on healthcare. And today she's a founding partner at a brand and marketing strategy consultancy, Mixtape Partners. Mixtape launched just a few months ago, and it is specifically focused on actionable strategies that are designed to be sticky. And strategy and integrating strategy is at the core of what they do. And that's why I'm excited, because that's the theme this year at Signal, Deb. So welcome to Signal.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm excited to talk with you guys today.
Me too. It's great timing, as I said. Can you tell me how Mixtape came about? Like, give us your founding story.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting one because it's been a long time coming. There are 4 of us that through the years have worked together in various configurations, clients, agencies, that kind of thing. And through the years, as we've each come to different intersections in our careers, we've found ourselves talking to each other around, what should I do next? What am I thinking about? That kind of thing. And every now and then we'd say, wouldn't it be great if we did something together? But then one of us would get recruited to the next thing. And so about a year ago, a couple of us found ourselves at one of these intersections, and we said, okay, like, what if we actually spent a little bit more than a what if conversation on what this could be? And so last spring, I did a bit of a listening tour, talking to a bunch of different marketers and leaders around the problems that they were facing. And to be honest, and you guys know this, the world does not need another brand consultant. So it was more like, what's really happening? What's really your problems? And what are you really facing? And we found that a lot of what people were telling us were experiences that we had ourselves as leaders and as marketers, that we can develop strategies until the cows come home. You can develop a strategy and have a great deck and a manifesto video and maybe a Super Bowl ad, but then nothing changes. Like, everything just goes back to the way it was, or worse. And so what we said is, what if we really focused our attention on how do we make strategies stick? Like, what is it about strategies that can be designed for action? So that's really what we decided to do. And we took the leap and we came out of stealth mode last fall. And now we've got a couple of really big clients with big, chunky, juicy problems, which is really, really a lot of fun, actually. And the 4 of us are good friends, and that makes it even more exciting, too.
Yeah, I don't know why it takes us, almost 4 decades to figure out that working, very closely with good people on interesting problems is probably the best career advice you could give anybody.
It really is. It's true.
I wonder, I know that obviously you can't, tell us who your clients are because these are ongoing, but can you describe the kind of problem that you're tackling and sort of, where things get stuck when it comes from taking what seems like a great strategy and integrating it into the organization and seeing it executed across all the, touch points?
Yeah. So our clients right now we've got 3 in particular that we're really deep in, and they're very, very different in many ways, but there's kind of a common thread throughout, which is around developing a strategy, and then how do you get it really implemented and adopted. And one client, for example, is a decades old leader in their industry, family or private company, again, essentially top of their game, but they don't really have room to grow. When you're number 1 or 2, and as many of, people in the audience know, you have to really think about what you do to grow and expand. And so we're helping them look at expansion strategy from the perspective of moving from one market that they're dominating in into an entirely new market, but taking the core assets. They have talent, they have infrastructure, they've got know-how and expertise, and how can they apply that into a new realm? So we're helping them understand that new ecosystem and where they could play. And we're designing a strategy for them with them actually around how would you move into these new markets? What are those kind of core moves that you could make? Is it an acquisition? Is it spinning something out? But also reconciling the brand and how the brand moves into new space. And so that is really interesting work because we're working with the corporate strategy team, but we have this hat on of, okay, now how does it really go throughout the organization once we've got a playbook and once we know the direction, which means we're starting to work with a lot of different leaders within the organization.
It strikes me might be, and certainly in your experience, from working with you over the years and even mine, that it's often those people where strategy sort of stops working because there is something that inherently is in conflict between what the people feel like they need to do every day to get their job done and to check the boxes they need to check and to, the path that they've understood they're on for whatever period of time, and the new strategy, which may require a set of thinking and permissioning that doesn't exist. So do you run into that, and do you work on that, and how is that accepted, or how can it be accepted?
Yeah, no, in fact, the answer is almost in your question. It really is, how do you bring people along from the beginning? And instead of, and as a CMO, or just a leader in general, strategy often happens in some conference room somewhere, and then it comes out and here's the new thing. But if people don't feel ownership and they don't understand what is different and what they should be doing differently, change is hard. People, just humans don't like change. And so how can you bring people along so that they have pride of ownership, so that they had a seat at the table, not just as a figurehead or a check the box, but they really were part of the development. And I think one of the key learnings that I have from my years at Intel is there's a very key, strong cultural tool called disagree and commit. And that is, you've got, people can, once they all agree on what the problem is, and that's often the biggest hurdle, is let's just agree on what problem we're trying to solve. Then you can really get to, okay, now we might not all agree on how to solve the problem, but at least we agree on the problem. And then the disagree and commit part is, okay, I'm not sure that I have the answer, but it sounds like the rest of you have the answer. So I'm going to actually say, I'm going to disagree and commit. And that's an incredibly powerful cultural element where you can move people forward just for the goodness of the organization and for the project, for the team. You have to also have your eyes open for the opposite of that, which is agree and not commit. And sometimes that happens too, where people will bring out that, yes, I agree with you, but then the reality is they just go back to do the thing that they were doing all along. So that's one of the things that we really try to implement is, how do we bring people along from the beginning so that they have that ownership and they understand what changes are necessary and that they're okay with those changes and that we've helped them along.
It's interesting. I love disagree and commit. That's a term I'm going to steal from you, or maybe it's from Intel. But I'm curious. Sometimes strategy itself might just be wrong. I mean, in the example that you gave, I imagine it's a pretty big commitment for the company to determine, okay, we're going to go into this market that may be adjacent, but we don't have brand permissioning right now, so we have to figure out how to get there, right? And I'm curious, how much do you find, even if you're brought in to work on implementation and integration of strategy, you end up working on the strategy itself?
Yeah. And so I think that most of the time, in my experience, the strategy itself isn't flawed. people, especially, smart people know what needs to be done or what changes need to be made. Um, if, whether it's stop doing something or start doing something. And it's really just where it breaks down is now what to do. And so the flaw may not be the idea itself. It might be just in the reality check of the idea. Do we have the right resources? Do we have the right funding? Do we have the right culture? Culture is huge in this realm, especially when we're talking about marketing and brands. And so the strategy might not be flawed, but you have to have that reality check of what's happening externally in the environment. What are some of the hurdles internally that could prevent the strategy from actually moving forward? And one of the things that we've given a lot of thought to is as like, again, as a CMO, I've been on both sides of this, where I've just, the power of the pen. I've just said, make it so. This is the new strategy, and then nothing happens. It's like, oh, well, why is that? I said that yes, it's approved, or the CEO's approved it, so therefore make it so, and that doesn't work. It really doesn't. You really have to have stakeholders and collaboration and buy-in. And the other part of it is I've had experiences where it was very, very hard, but we were able to get all the stakeholders, on board, and that we could move forward because we agreed on the problem, and then we developed a solution together. But yeah, you can try and make it so, and it doesn't work.
The significant strategic change almost always includes a measurable amount of risk. Right? You're risking new resources. You're risking your current structure to change it to support a new strategy. You're risking a lot. I'm curious from your, experience at Intel, if you can give us an example of when you took that kind of a risk on a new strategy and it worked out, or it didn't actually. That might be a better story.
I have lots of it didn't work. The one that comes to mind that actually did work, but it was again, in my long career, it was one of the most satisfying things I've ever done, but it was absolutely one of the most difficult things I've ever done. And that was when I first took over marketing. We had 35 brands, and it was just a mess. And one of the lessons that I learned from the role that I had prior to the CMO role was the complexity of selling our products and the complexity of getting people to understand what they all did, because it was technical. It's in tech terms, we call it speeds and feeds. It was a lot of specs, pretty boring stuff, actually. And so I decided that we really needed to simplify our brands and our roadmap. And the headline is in 18 months, we took our brands from 35 to 6. It was incredibly challenging.
In a company that large, that must have been pretty jarring.
It was jarring. Jarring is exactly what it was. And the role that I had as CMO, I couldn't just wave a wand and say, make it so. There was product people that had to be on board. And they had huge investments, deeply personal investments in some of these brands. They had, hoodies with their brand on it. Their kids had water bottles with the brand on it. Their whole identity was caught up in many cases with the brands, the other lesson here, especially with your audience today, people were confusing names and fanciful names with a brand. And so part of our exercise was, let's really define what it means to have a brand versus I've got some new, blue scrubbing bubbles or blue crystals that make this new thing better. That's a good brand enhancement, but that extra enhancement doesn't mean it's a brand unto itself. So there was a lot of brand 101 that went on. But the role that I had prior to being CMO was kind of a very special assignment where I was taken out of one of my marketing leadership roles and asked to start our Apple business. And at the time, Apple was famously not an Intel client or customer. And then they famously became that. And I had the honor of building out that team and running that business for several years. But part of that was having to explain to all these brilliant Apple people the Intel roadmap and what all these products and brands meant. And it was being on that side of the table and having to try and sell it, or not even sell, just explain it, was where I had this empathy for, God, this is really hard. So going into the CMO role, one of my first things was I really, really want to tackle this problem. And really what it took was understanding the implications of these changes and implications both internally, like I said, everybody had a hoodie with a brand on it. But also, if you think Intel as an ingredient, we had customers like Dell and Lenovo and Apple that had to also make changes in all of their products and how they sold their products. We had places like Best Buy and all of the channels that sold computer products that had to make changes. And this was in 42 countries. And it was just a massive undertaking. But in the first year, after all these changes were implemented, we saw an increase of $4 billion in gross margin because it just was simpler to sell our products. We did good, better, best.
That seems like a win.
It was a win. Really, I've got a lot of scars, but yeah, it's a win.
Yeah.
But again, it was a strategy that within the first 3 weeks, we knew what we wanted to do. And we had stakeholders, and I understood what was at stake for the stakeholders, but we had alignment. But then it took 18 months to actually make it all happen over time. But the strategy was simple. It was clean up the roadmap, go to good, better, best. We often cited Wendy's or Burger King. There's 1 patty burgers, 2 patty burgers, 3 patty burgers. It also required us to understand what was happening in manufacturing and what products we wanted to put out of our factories and what volume. And so, people go into the fast food restaurant, they say, I'm really hungry, but 1 patty burger isn't enough. 3 patties is too many. 2 is just right. And so that's where we would align our product roadmaps to figure out what we wanted to sell and how we were going to sell it. That included supply chain and factory as well.
Well, you're really pointing out that, by thinking, and this was some years ago, but I would say that the theme of Signal this year is integration of strategy. And that means you have to think about all of the different, effects and follow-ons and, the things that impact prior and after. So supply chain, manufacturing, communications, and branding, all of it. And I wish we could keep talking, but we're at time. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us for this Signal conversation. And we're going to check in with you in a little while and see how things are going. And maybe by then you'll have an example you can tell us about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.